Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki ngā atua, te hunga te aki tātou i ngā wā katoa, mihi ki te whenua, te kāinga u kaipō, te tūranga waiwai o tātou. Ka mau mahara hoki tātou ki o tātou tipuna, te hunga kua wihi atu ki te pō. E tipu ana hau I raro e tō maunga rongo kāko, I te taha o te awa tuki, I noho ana hau kei ahuriri, ko Sarah ai ono tōku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora and welcome along to this live panel discussion presentation with my very good friend, Tīnaka Waitoa Tualawhata. I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a moment. But the focus of this presentation is on the collaborative research project that I am involved in with T at Te Whai Hiringa, kura in Hawke's Bay, and the project is titled Ko te tākaro te kauwaka e pakari ake ai te tangata, which is focused on cultural pluralism for play-based technology. So we're going to talk about that this morning. So Tīnaka, I'll get you to introduce yourself.
Tēnā tātou katoa, ka tēnei te mihi nui ki a koe, Sarah, te kaiwhakahare o tēnei kōrero I te ata nei. Ka nui te mihi ki a koe, Adrian, ki te haerenga ki tēnei kōrero. Ko Tīnaka Waitoa Tualawhata tōku ingoa, ko te tūmuaki o te kura o te Whai Hiringa, he uri ahau no Ngāti Porou, ki te Aotearoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, Sarah. Thanks for having us on. And yeah, looking forward to chatting about our research.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tīnaka and I go back a long way. So this is a new role for both T and I to be presenting in this format. But I first met Tīnaka as a beginning teacher at Belmont Intermediate School in the North Shore in Auckland. We are both from Te Mātua Māui, both from Hawke's Bay, but we found ourselves in our early part of our careers on the North Shore in Auckland at an intermediate school there. So that's where we first met, and since then we have crossed paths many times professionally, whilst also keeping connected personally as well. So it's a real privilege to be sharing the screen with my good friend T today. So what we're going to look at is, I'm going to share the screen in a moment and talk to you a little bit about the project that we're involved in. But to give you a little bit of a background first, how this came about is sort of off the back of the doctoral research that I conducted a few years ago now. And it came really about a conversation, didn't it, T, with you and I, where I kind of just threw it out there and said, I'd love to test my P-blot. I'd love to test the outcomes again, but in a way that, you know, we could look at student outcome, we could look at how it fits culturally within New Zealand. And that was sort of the start of the conversation, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so our school was going through a bit of a period. My school, just for context, we're in the heart of Flaxmere, and so you can imagine that our makeup of our school, we're 96% Māori and Pacifica. And so we were going through a bit of a stage where we were looking at the way that we were organising our curriculum, and decided that it was really important that the context in which we teach needed to be mātauranga and mātauranga Pacifica or te mona nui a kiwa first. And so when Sarah and I have chats, as we often do, the chat turned to, I would love to do play, but it would have to be from an Indigenous lens. So I would like to add kind of that layer to it. And from there, the idea was born, wasn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, it was. And I wanted to just acknowledge too the amazing support that we've had from Associate Professor Tara McLaughlin from Massey University. She's been a mentor and supervisor to me all through my research career so far. And so she was a huge supporter and encourager of us applying for some research funding with the TLRI initiative, and guided us through that process. And also to acknowledge the support we receive from Ngāti Kangunu, who are also one of the research partners as well. And that sort of that backdrop, that feeling like we're you know, being supported to do this with some pretty amazing people around us as well. So to kind of give a background, so that the research that I conducted, the outcomes of the research I conducted was that we created a framework, we created a set of practices based on the research available to us around play, which predominantly sits in a Western theory of research, right? So we, you know, all the readings that I did, all the material I engaged in to create this framework of practices that we know support learning and play while honouring child-led play, come from a research base that's of Western theory. There's very little that we could access because, as with most things mātauranga Māori, it's passed down, it's generational, it's taonga, and it's not necessarily published in academic journals. So we decided from that we would look at how we could create and revise and review this framework so that it better situated and contextualized itself within that mātauranga framework. So I'll share the screen, and perhaps what we do then is, if I can find it, I can share the screen and we can have a chat about the project aims first of all. So we go over to the project aim. So do you want to give a bit of a background as to the work you'd done around that Indigenous frame for your school first, T, and then we can go into the play from there?
Yeah, that would probably make sense.
Yeah.
So the real push for the approach that we've taken was COVID and was the lockdowns, because nothing gave us a clearer indication of the inequities than decile system. Then when we were given the privilege being able to see inside homes during COVID, and when we had some whānau, we were trying to dress up on we had mamas, you know, who had one device and children at home, the one device. And so, of course, it went to the children that were doing NCEA. So through that, we started looking into the work of Dr. Anne Milne. She's got some mahi she's done around, it's called Decolonizing the Curriculum, and also colouring in the white spaces. So we just started to look at how the practices we were using at our school, even with our 96% Māori and Pacifica, we're still highly westernised in their foundations, I guess. So yes, that's where that sort of stemmed from for us. We then worked with Waikato University, looked into Potama Pounamu, and that looked deeply at the way that we are questioning, we are asking, we are behaving as teachers inside the classroom, and how sometimes, very unconsciously, the message is being given in regards to the imbalance of, I guess, the positioning of mātauranga Māori versus a more Western look at things. What was interesting to me is when we looked at our Ngāti Kahungunu Refresh strategy, so that's the iwi here in the Hawke's Bay, and there's you know, a bunch of very learned academics in Ngāti. They put this education plan together. Play was centred in there. That is the whānau of Hawke's Bay, really. So we were given that challenge of how to look at play, the play realm, for us to look at other cultural practices inside it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Sorry, your connection's a little bit back and forward with sometimes you're breaking out a little bit.
I don't know if it's us or you. I was texting you before saying you're glitching, so something's glitching.
Yeah, it might be my end at the moment. So apologies for people that are hearing those glitches. Yeah, it does. And the certainly what we've noticed is anecdotally in the work that we do with Longworth Education, that often I'm working in kura kaupapa or maki contexts, and play is very much a central part of what's being done, but in a way that people are unsure about that, in terms of it looking rigorous, in terms of it looking like it's a useful way to learn. So that's something that was definitely coming up as well.
Sorry, Sarah, can you hear me? Yeah. I think in terms of Māoridom too, or play in a play pedagogy space is how Māori learned. We did it, you know, there were formal schools for formal knowledge, but generally if kids showed a urge for play, or an urge for the stars, or an urge for the mara, those urges were encouraged by Māori kaumātua, Māori elders. So I probably think it aligns more closely with mātauranga Māori than the school approaches we.
Yeah, absolutely. And an interesting book that I would really recommend people reading is Harcourt Brown's book, Ira Tākaro, where he talks about the ira, the schema, or the urges that we use in a Western context, but the ira, as you said, they were used to celebrate the child's mana and their learning. He calls it learning propositions, you know, what they were kind of putting out there as a strength for children to be noticed, right, for the rest of the whānau to notice. And he actually suggests in the book that those colonized teaching practices and the learning outcomes that came from those actually served to repress those ira tākaro, those play schema. And so the indigenous learning methods and that sort of taonga tākaro have been forgotten. And so this is some of the research that we did to kind of bring this proposal together and inform what we wanted to achieve with this research. Yeah. So our project aim as a result of looking at this, and what we did is we put together a proposal to the TLRI initiative, which is part of the NZCER funding program, and we applied for a 2-year research grant to undertake this research. And our aim there, you'll see on the screen, is to identify how play pedagogy can be used to foster particularly Te Whai Hiringa's values of manaakitanga, whanaungatanga and māramatanga, and honour the goals of iwi and hapū and whānau, primarily within the Ngāti Kahungunu space, right? So this is where the school sits, and we'll talk about the complexities of what we've found with iwi and how it's not quite as simple as that, but you know, Ngāti Kahungunu is tangata whenua in terms of where Te Whai Hiringa are, and so we're using the education strategy that is an amazing document put together to guide that as well. So the research questions, I'll just go through those as well, and then we'll talk about how we're doing it. So these are the questions that we're using to guide our research and guide the information that we're collecting. So first of all, what do we already know? What is it that people's perspectives are and experiences are of play in terms of ākonga and whānau, kaiako and iwi? So we'll talk about how the data that we got around that to address that question. Then we want to look at the play practices and how they are in line or align with the values that the school have, and how they support culturally sustaining pedagogy. As a result of that, what professional learning and development support do teachers need to be able to implement play pedagogies that are culturally sustaining? And then eventually, what impact do these play pedagogies have on that sense of connection and belonging and language and identity that the ākonga hopefully will have as a result of these play practices. So from a methodological point of view, I can never say that right, the process that we designed to undertake this research is called a research, design-based research methodology. So what we decided to do, in keeping with a mātauranga Māori approach, is that we wanted to actually draw on two ways of learning about this, two ways of going about this information. You know, it would be ironic if we applied a Western method of, you know, research to a primarily focused on Indigenous practices. So what we set about doing was creating a framework through wānanga, and that instead of Tinaka and I coming in and just researching on people and researching about, that actually everyone involved informs the research and everyone guides where we're going. So it's called design-based research. And so when we started, we kind of created a framework, but the scary thing is we don't know where it's going, which has been a little interesting because the team, the kaiako involved, at times have kind of looked to us for answers, haven't they?
Yeah, and it's pretty hard for two control freaks like you and I that like to have things tidy. So it's been good learning, really. And yeah, for kaiako, for teachers, you know, generally we're not people that just leave things, chuck it into the wind. We do that once when we do inquiry, because that's the part of the day we can handle doing that. But the rest of it, we like to have it sort of planned out. Yeah, and I found some interesting questions, Sarah. When people have been asking me about the research, they said, so what are you trying to do? What are you finding out? And I said, well, no, that's what research is. We're researching. Yeah, it has been interesting. It's been a good discipline, I guess, to get used to. It's just knowing what it throws up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's taken me a long time, I think, too, because you kind of have this, well, you have a hope of what it's going to look like, but also I know for me, I have a gut feeling of where I think it's going to go, and I have to try very hard not to let that direct me, to look for that. And also too, the tool that we're using, which is the play-based learning observation tool that came out of my doctoral research, is my baby, right? It's this thing that I've created, and effectively I've kind of gone, okay, well, let's test it and we'll put it out here, and we'll talk about the wānanga in a moment, but we sort of put it out there and go, you know, what do we think? And it could have been completely slammed down and gone, this is just nuts, you know. And then I kind of think, well, that's 6 years of research gone, you know. So it is a scary thing. But what we are doing in this method is that we're going through a cyclical review process. So we initially started with the data collection phase, and that phase there is that po kohi kohi, which is getting all that information related to perspective that we had as part of our first research question. So we interviewed kaiako, we interviewed whānau, surveyed whānau, interviewed children, and we also observed kaiako in their practice. So we got a lot of data. As always, with any research, it's hard to get the numbers that you want. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges in engaging whānau and things like that?
Yeah, so the reason why we have ethics is because in the past in our whānau, even though I think some of them probably haven't been involved in their research, it's just underlying whānau and whānau. So that was the very first hurdle, was getting them to understand. And I think a lot with we've got cyber safety and things like that. People are a lot more conscious of keeping their information safe and wanting to know. So for those whānau that were interested, it was a great time to be able to explain more deeply what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. It also was great for us as the researchers to, just understand some of the fears and to ensure that the processes we were doing were transparent and clear. And then the other part of that was myself being the principal of the school as well as the researcher, some of the ethical things that we needed to think about there to keep everyone safe. So there was a ton of learning inside there about, research. And so I was very grateful for Tara and the way she guided us and, your experience through that. But in the end, we were able to talk with whānau and get them to, it took a while. We usually, with most of them, we had to do a one-on-one question with tama to understand it. That was interesting, and it really stretched us as teachers about how we can reframe things for the tamariki to understand. So I found that personally, that stage really challenging. It was worthwhile, and the information that we got out of it in the end made it all worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to share some of that data in just a moment as well. So that was our pre-information collection phase, and I also went in and completed classroom observations of each teacher involved in the project using the current play-based learning observation tool. So that was the tool that we used for the research. Then the next phases we're now working through. So we're now in the sort of halfway between the second and third phase there. And at the moment we are developing a framework, but we're also implementing it. So this is where that design-based research is sort of fluid, which again, as T alluded to, it's a little bit of a challenge for control freaks, but we're kind of going with the flow. And so we're almost kind of knitting our socks as we're wearing them, because the school year is underway. We've met with the teachers. We've already basically presented and run a wānanga with the project team. We had a kaumātua there, Hawera Hape from Ngāti Kangunu, to guide us, and we unpacked the P-blot. We put it to the teachers and said, these are the practices that Western theory says are appropriate. Where do they fit within the school values? Do they fit? Is there a place for this? Do we need to reword it? So we spent, some really solid time unpacking that, and we had some really interesting results out of that, which I'll share. This year, we're intending to then go and implement this fully. We then will come back for wānanga again to revise the framework that we're putting together and see how the teachers feel about it. Then we'll test it again, hopefully, if we've got enough time in the year. And then we will analyse that final data. I do just want to acknowledge that we, being based in the Hawke's Bay, we are now chasing our tail because Cyclone Gabrielle had an impact on our research timeframe. We were significantly delayed with that as our whānau and community had to manage that unexpected event. And we also had delays with our ethics application as well. So we're around about a term and a half behind at the moment, which is interesting challenge too. So I just want to share some of the data that we got, because I think this is gold as our pre-data, and I certainly know that our kaiako found this particularly interesting as well. So what we did with our tamariki is they were in every classroom that whānau gave consent for. So we obviously had to get informed consent to interview tamariki as well. They were interviewed using a guided interview protocol, and I've just picked out a couple of the questions that they were asked. And what we did is we basically asked them these series of questions, and then we thematically coded them. So we've put together the most popular answers and themes from those answers. So you can see very clearly that play is one of the biggest things that they love coming to school for. It's really important for our tamariki. They haven't put up their, I don't know, spelling That's not what gets them out of bed in the morning. They probably know they have to do it, and that's a thing of learning, but it's not the thing that makes them come to school, right? So play, friends, learning was a big one. Maths they love as well. So Whai Hiringa are doing some good things with maths if kids are
I was going to say that's a good indicator of, you know, what's being focused on, that attention principle, because right now we're going through DMIC, developing mathematical inquiries. So I don't think traditionally you would have quite a big maths one on there, but we've been making maths more accessible and using play to do so. So hence maths being quite big. I'm quite happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key themes that came through a lot was playing outside, right? So this is something that came through in the data a lot, is outside play was quite significant for the tamariki as well. We then had what they enjoy about their class. Pretty clear here what they love about their class. You can see, you know, the most popular ones, obviously the toys, the play, making, friends, Lego, reading, teacher. So, you know, that's another, you know, lovely indicator. And certainly the kaiako, when they saw this data, it was really affirming to them, which was lovely as well. Some nice feedback for them. About your teacher, we thought, which was really interesting as well. You know, they obviously have some beautiful relationships with their kaiako. They feel loved, they feel cared for. They know that the kaiako is there to help them, to teach them. And I thought it was nice down there, the smarter, making them brainy. There was some really lovely individual feedback in there as well. And they, you know, hugs and things like that. So again, this just affirms some of that that research we know contextually within Aotearoa around how important relationships are and how important that connection is for our students in order for them to feel engaged at school and safe and secure at school. And then finally, their favourite thing to do. And this raised some interesting questions that the teachers asked during the wānanga. Obviously, friends are the most important thing for kids to be playing with. But a lot of what we noticed with the responses was that the children's definition of play focused firmly on playtime and the playground, and they didn't necessarily see play as the thing they did in class time. And that was quite an interesting outcome for the kaiako, wasn't it, T?
Yeah, it was. And I was just thinking the slide back, there was also a little bit that said angry as well. And so along with all the good stuff is also, you can see in the middle of there, of teach. And I know that the teachers were quite taken back. They were like, oh, you know, we're not angry. We don't do those sort of things, but it's you know, it gave them food for thought about facial expressions, body language, unsaid things, even though you aren't physically angry or whatever. Is it your body language when they're doing the things they you know, shouldn't be doing and things like that? So that was really interesting for us to see that. It was also interesting, I think, for us to see that play was based around toy, like a type of toy. And so I think we've always been very aware, even before we started down the play pedagogy line, about lots of plastic toys and things like that, and always trying to bring it to the outside. But I think the research and the survey of the kids, the corridor with the children, brought it to the fore that we wanted to deepen for the tamariki what play can be. You know, looking there, I go Barbie and puzzles and trucks and, you know, and those things, of course, are all really wonderful and important for play. But yeah, it did start to have us start to question a bit more, which is always the starting of a good zhuzh up with everything. Yeah.
And I know too that there were some individual responses that said, you know, when they were asked about play and learning, that there was some quite sort of horrified responses from the kids about, no, you know, you don't play, not in class time. That's, you know, that's not important. You have to learn and do what the teacher says. So that was interesting too.
Yeah, and again, those unconscious messages, because the teachers were like, we don't say to them that they're not allowed. Like, we don't talk negatively about play. And so, yeah, it's about those unconscious messages we're giving, the biases that we have towards certain things and what we're showing. So, yeah, although those things are hard to hear sometimes, it's sometimes our greatest teacher is the out of the mouth of babes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so then we also presented during the wānanga perspective from whānau. So whānau were given a survey to complete online, and it was a very short survey, but just some simple questions to ask them, and they had to indicate their agreement or disagreement with the statements. And the questions were focused around culturally sustaining teaching practices. They were questions around their perspective on play, and then the intersection of both of them. So I haven't selected all the outcomes, the data from that, because we'd be here for another hour, but just the highlights to share with you. The first one is this one here. And this is quite an interesting one, because what we wanted to do was get perspective from whānau around their expectations when children come to school, what learning would look like, what it is that they have an expectation of. And one of the reasons for this question is that often at school, we think that families want learning to look a certain way, so that it appears to be rigorous, and that school's doing its job and all that kind of thing. So this was an interesting question to ask. So you can see from here that we, out of the 90 something, I can't remember how many, we had quite a lot of responses, that we had, sorry, these are in percentage, we had 16% agreed with this. So not a little amount, but not a big amount. And obviously 41% disagreed with this statement, which means that they disagreed that learning should be formalized when children arrived at school. We had some interesting questions from the teachers around the whānau involved in answering this, though, didn't we, T?
You might just need to repeat that. You glitched out.
So we had some interesting sort of questions from the teachers about the whānau that chose to respond and their perspective.
Yeah. It was just all interesting. the whole exercise of doing so. I think, you know, sometimes we think you wait till you get to the end to learn the thing you're going to learn, but there's so much learning along the way.
Yeah. And I think one of the questions was, you know, how do we, you know, were these the families who, you know, would complete a survey for a start? Are they the families who are most likely to complain, or are they the families that are already on our side, you know, already understand this, or who maybe have a background in education or play, or know this? So there was sort of all that came up with it, which is certainly part of our job when we come to the end of this project, to kind of look at those variables as well as we report the findings. But this was designed really to help kaiako feel a little bit more confident in implementing play, without that sort of feeling that parents are going to be watching every step of the way and disagreeing with what they're doing. This next one here is looking at the support around play to support te reo me o ngā tikanga, and having whānau understand that play is the way that children learn language and culture and learn tikanga. It's a natural way to you know, embed it and embody it. And it was lovely to see that, you know, we had strong agreement there in that process as well. So that was a positive response. And this one here again shows just how important whānau see students' voice to be taken into consideration, the mana of our children to be taken into consideration, and not be taught to or taught at, but to be included in the process as well. And this was a bit of a no-brainer for us too, which was nice. Yeah. And so then moving on to our kaiako perspectives, and again, this was interesting for us as researchers to see what kaiako thought, but also in comparison to our whānau perspective as well. So the first one here is that what did they think of play being the vehicle to be able to support the development of reo and tikanga in our kids? And we didn't have quite the same agreement.
No.
Which is interesting. And did you want to talk to that at all? Any thoughts around that, T?
No, I'm sitting here and I remember still being stung by that last time. So I think for me, what that showed for us is just the ways in which that we learn te reo Māori and tikanga, because there's actually no other way to learn tikanga but through a play approach. You know, when we go into the marae, that we can call that a formal setting, but that's play. That's playing with the tikanga, you know. So and then I think the other thing is just at that stage developing what is play, you know, because I think we had a very narrow view of free play and not necessarily the other. So it will be interesting to see a difference at the end, because I think that's what you've been bringing to us, Sarah, is that understanding of the deepness and the of play and the teacher being teaching here. So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's been lots of discussion around play and what we mean by play, what the teacher role is with play. And I think that this, you know, that misunderstanding around the teacher role has led to potentially what this reflects here around how we gift language, how we gift tikanga to children as they play. Yeah. This was also interesting around parental expectation, that we had some teachers agreeing that parents do expect a formalized approach. So it was nice for them to see whānau perspective that disagreed with that or conflicted with that. So again, it just helped bring those two sets of data together to show that actually what we think parents want isn't always what they actually want. So that was useful to see as well. And obviously that strong neutral in there shows that teachers were just not sure what parents thought. So that was nice too.
Yeah, and in our school, we've got a large percentage of Pacifica whānau, and generally, I'm not speaking, you know, for everybody, but generally our Pacifica parents are very trusting of school, and school knows best, and whatever school says, that's what we do. And so I think that's a big proportion of this, of what we expect that they expect. Generally comes from an older traditional thinking set of values and things like that. So yeah, like you said, it was really good to have the data to show the teachers, to give them the confidence to let go of those controls a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. So where we're at now and what we're up to as a result of getting that data. So the first thing that came from that data and from the wānanga is that when we pulled apart the play-based learning observation tool, and so to give a bit of background, this tool is a tool that has 31 indicators that list practices that we would expect to see in a well-functioning play classroom. And along with education, we use this to guide the work that we do with teachers in our coaching. We use it to shape the practices, and these are observable practices. These are not sort of just aspirational stuff. This is, I'm going to come in and see if I can see this practice while your children are playing. So these practices really help guide teachers to know what it is and when and how they do what they do in order to support their children's learning. So as I said, in the wānanga, we put all those indicators out. We literally cut them all up and got teachers to consider whether they aligned with the values of Te Whai Hiringa, and that they represented practices that they thought were valuable. And we found that really all of them did. There was nothing we could chuck out.
Nope.
which I was most relieved about. But what we did notice was that some language needed to change, and that there was some that maybe we could include. And so we're now in the process of actually reviewing and revising that document between Tīnaka and myself. We're going through every indicator, making sure that it is reflective of a cultural viewpoint to support Te Ao Māori. And as part of that process, so we have the tool, and each indicator has a description of a sort of graduation of those practices. So 1 is there's little evidence of this, and there's a description. A 3 is that there's sort of developing evidence of this practice and a description, and then 5, there's really strong evidence. And so we're now modifying that so that we are describing in a classroom that aligns with a Te Ao Māori perspective, supports Te Reo Māori, tikanga Māori, mātauranga Māori, alongside the play. So that's the first thing that we're doing. Part of that means that we're creating another section to the tool that ensures that it reflects culturally sustaining play pedagogy as well, that doesn't sit within the other sections. So 1 will be, for example, that teachers are working to build their confidence and use of Te Reo Māori in the classroom, and that they are gifting language, gifting kupu to children during the play, so that it's becoming just part of the culture in the classroom, that they're surrounded by te reo as well. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. And I was just thinking through this process. One of the more interesting stories we've had is there was a group of children. One little boy had just come back from a tangi, from his nan's tangi, and so he was sitting down. They've got some play materials. He had made a marae, and he had set up this whole funeral scene that he had just been seeing. And so he was playing his scene and doing the whai kōrero and the karanga on the marae, and then he picked up the basket, and he called over his mates, and they were all the pallbearers, and they had the basket up on their shoulder, and they were all walking their tūpapaku, their casket, through the classroom, and they were wailing, as our nannies do, to show grief, and so there comes a point in the classroom where you're just like, is this appropriate? What should we do? What do we say? How do we engage in this play? How do we develop this further? And so there will be things that will come along as the kids start to enact and start to be allowed and have this permission, that those things don't just have to happen on the marae. Those playthings can happen in here. And so, yeah, we were just looking around concepts of tikanga. So I think that's the strongest thread that's coming through, isn't it, Sarah? Is that to make play indigenised is just becomes the introduction of tikanga, about what is appropriate and what is in different hapū and in different whānau and in different iwi. That will be the challenge for everyone, is that it's different in every one of those. So it lends itself beautifully to making sure that there's engagement with whānau around these things. And so with that scene with the tangihanga and things like that, we're talking about maybe the tikanga could be at the end of that we have a karakia to do what we call whakawāte, or to clear the space. But how beautiful, right, that the kids are able to enact things that are in their real life. And I think those tangi continued for quite a few days in the classroom. So yeah, it was just about the teachers opening up, feeling safe, talking to whānau, understanding who had passed, so that they could have that kōrero. Other ways that this has been coming up is tikanga around here. Anything to do with the head in Māoridom is sacred, because our brain lives inside there, and so the playing with hair and things like that, again, would be something that would be discussed with whānau in terms of tikanga and making it safe inside a classroom. So yeah, all of those lovely, interesting, rich things are starting to come up and form the basis of the research.
Yeah. And I think what's been interesting too is some of the, one of the things that is our research question or our aim is, what professional development supports do our kaiako need? What resources do they need? And many of our teachers in the project are non-Māori. We have some beautiful reo speakers, and certainly our kaiako in the project are working hard to be understanding and confident within Te Ao Māori space. But as a non-Māori myself, I know that the intention is to want to do right, to do best, to follow tikanga, which can often lead to us actually making a blanket decision that doesn't necessarily represent what the essence of that tikanga is. And so one of the things that came up, as we said, around the head and the hair was playing hairdressers. For some of our kaiako, they said, well, we know that the head is tapu, it's sacred. So if we see children doing that, we just say no hairdressers. You can't touch heads. And in consultation with our kahungunu iwi, our advisors, he said, well, I love a good head massage, when I go to the hairdressers. And so we kind of unpacked that, and it was more to do with consent to touch head. Now that's Ngāti Kahungunu. So, to understand that would be a general understanding with an iwi, but again, we still have to check with whānau, because not all whānau are Ngāti Kahungunu. Not all will follow that, even if they are Ngāti Kahungunu. So it's for non-Māori, the idea is that we will create a guideline of how to work through this process so that you're not making a general blanket decision that impacts on children's play, that you've gone through a consultation process around it so that you feel more confident navigating that space to be able to enable play. And the other thing that's come up just in our most recent conversation is around the use of resources and kinds of resources that children are playing with that are more culturally appropriate. So we've had a lot of discussion around play in the sandpit and the implements that children would use in the sandpit. And the idea that maybe, for example, instead of having plastic shovels, that we have power shells, because traditionally power shells would be used to be digging at the beach, as one example. And then we talked about, well, what if the power shells are then used to go and decorate the robot inside that's been made out of cardboard? What's the tikanga around that? And T, do you want to explain what we sort of came to with that idea in the end?
So we started looking around the different tikanga things, and I can't actually, can you, my brain's gone a little bit blank after you said that, and I thought, oh gosh, she's going to ask me that. Can you
we just talked,
memory, and then it'll come back to me.
We talked about recognizing that we are using tools in the context in which they're normally used in, and now we're going to take them out of that context and the protocol around that.
So in Māoridom, there's all sorts of our Māori atua, Maui is one that most New Zealanders will be familiar with in terms of his curiosity. So he didn't necessarily follow all the tikanga, Maui. He would push the boundaries on these things. And so, that's part of who we want these tamariki to be as well. So I think as long as we're teaching the tikanga, and then when we are finding things that aren't quite right in that space, it's just it's a opportunity to reteach the tikanga rather than a scold or a growl. And I think we need to do the same sort of things with teachers. Do you know what I mean? Like, we have to, you'll find that more Māori are the ones that are kind of more fluid with how things are going. And I think more the Pākehā teachers are the ones that are more strict on it in terms of tikanga. So, I think we just understand that children have natural curiosities. And, just because they take the power shower and now start digging in the mara, the garden, it's no big, because, you know, Tane Mahuta and Tangaroa are brothers, you know, there are always conflicts with brothers and things like that. So I think if it just provides an opportunity to talk about those things, it would provide an opportunity then to go back and have a kōrero about Tangaroa and Tane Mahuta and their relationship and things like that. Because I'm sure a lot of those things were mixed. You know, pounamu was taken from the water and was mixed with wood to make axes, yeah. So those things aren't necessarily, it's not that they can't mix. It's just I just think that provides a rich opportunity to now to start to explore relationships, you know, within. Yeah.
And those protocols around teaching a little karakia, you know, hey, thank you for, you know, the gift of the pounamu that I'm now going to use on my robot, you know, and so some of the guidelines that we're going to create around that are these ideas that teachers can use, so that there is, as you say, there's the fluidity rather than this sort of strict yes or no, which kind of goes back to the point a little bit right at the start where, you know, as Harkle Brown said, that westernized approach has actually dampened ira tākaro in children, because there is this strictness of, no, that, you know, you don't do that there, you don't jump over there, you don't climb that, and jumping and climbing are the things that kids want to do. And so there is that kind of more relaxed approach and recognition of these ira and how we can foster them, and a guide to perhaps, okay, that's not the tree to climb because it's still a young sapling, but over here, here's the tree. You know, look at what Tane Mahuta provided you to climb with. You know, this is a nice strong tree. So the guide around that instead, I think is really important.
Yeah, and you know, with Maui, he celebrated his curiosity, even though he was a little scallywag sometimes in the things that he did, you know. And some of our like Mahuika, who that was the one who took all the fire fingers and stuff like that, because he had to figure out how to do this. In the end, his curiosity gifted us as tangata, as humans, with how to create fire. So there, you know, we all know that a cheeky Māori fella, sort of thing. So those characteristics in Māoridom are celebrated, but naturally there are people that are more serious and more responsible as well. I mean, we all have them in our whānau, no matter what race we are. You know, if we've all got a cheeky, you've got a cheeky Samoan husband. So yeah, I think it's just, for me, heading in now and thinking about how we might, as you say, create those guidelines. It's just very much about what everybody's talking about, creating mana whenua connections, asking whānau, you know, being in connection with them. Because our Māori whānau, although school has generally been a space that we don't come into, that depends on how we invite. That depends on whose knowledge is paramount. That depends on, you know, the ways in which we do so. Our Māori whānau will come. They will support, if they can see themselves reflected and they can understand that their values can also, you know, that they can hononga, that they can be together with the values of kura. Yeah.
And so our long-term goal with this is to complete this research this year. And at the end of this year, Tineka and I will publish and get the findings out there, and hopefully sort of mid next year, end of next year, that will be available. But the ultimate goal is that the guide or the framework that we put together can then be used in different contexts. So while this is being used in the context of Te Whai Hiringa, Ngāti Kahungunu, the process that we're using can then be uplifted and taken to another kura, another iwi, and be followed. There might be some changes that need to be made based on kawa, on tikanga of that area, but the process is robust enough that you know, people don't have to reinvent the wheel, basically, that they can follow this process and create their own set of guidelines as a result. So that's the aim long term, that it's not just isolated to one kura and one area or iwi, and maybe even used indigenously in other cultures overseas. That's the idea as well, is to support that revitalisation of any Indigenous space within kura as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just going to the last slide, if either Adrian or Rebecca, if you've got any questions for us, you've got a dedicated audience right now with us. You're welcome to ask any questions. And just give you a minute if you do want to ask anything, please do. For those who are watching this as a recorded session after we've held this live, please feel free to contact myself or Tinaka. In the next slide, I've got our email details there if you'd like to learn more. Please do. That the intent of this research as part of that TLRI process is that that we can disseminate, that we can share with other kura and other settings, so that people can learn from what we're doing just as much as we're learning in the process as well. So that's available there for everyone too. So Adrian, Rebecca, do you have any questions for us? One in the chat. Era tākaro. Yes. Yeah, so if you want to learn more, as I said, Harcourt Brown is amazing to connect with. He is really working hard at the moment to revitalise taonga tākaro, traditional Māori games and challenges and the like. And his book outlines a lot to do with the era, the schema or the urges that children had. What we found interesting in the research, so we consulted with a kaumātua here, Ngāti Kanganū kaumātua, and we asked him to share his stories of his childhood growing up in Hawke's Bay and some of the play that he was involved in. And while I could hear all the era that he was talking about, it was still very colonised play, wasn't it, T?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also in terms of Māoridom, tamariki that show very early a skill set for kōrero, kai kōrero, whai kōrero, and things like that. Sometimes they are guided towards that. And there are many amazing, wonderful speakers of many iwi who, like hawera, we're sort of pushed into those things. You know how some of those reluctant leaders, you don't know what you don't know, but they need to learn from a very early age. So hawera talked about being put on the pai, and he had to sit there while all the other kids were playing, but he had to do that. But, you know, now we've got such a beautiful gift in him, a beautiful, rich history and his whakōrero. So his knowledge of mana whenua and these lands, you know. So there is that. And then there was the Maui tiki like that, where, you know, sort of probably guided by their ears a little bit more towards their urges and where their urges were going. So, yeah, but he did talk a lot about that colonization, but I think it was more the period that it was in. We've got to remember in colonization all the different periods and the different ways in which Māori had to react to continue to thrive. Yeah.
Talked about getting in trouble for not having his hanky in his pocket in school, and, you know, having his uniform just right, and you know, and he attended a school in rural part of Hawke's Bay, where he'd been up very early in the morning helping his nanny in the garden before he had to get off to school and things like that. So but he talked about he loved playing rounders, which to me is the most British form of sport. You know, a little Māori boy from, I think it's Te Hauki, was he? That he was,
Te Hauki, like,
you know, a really sort of rural farming area of Hawke's Bay, Central Hawke's Bay, and here he is talking about playing rounders. So it sort of made us understand just how far back we would need to go to understand the play that happened before the influence of European society, and that much of that is lost. You know, our generations have passed in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it's 70+ years. My mother still taught, you know, when she attended school, still talks about they would go in the morning, they would not wear their shoes to school because they wanted to keep their shoes clean. They'd go from cowpat to cowpat to keep their feet warm, and then they'd wait for the cow to urinate so that they can clean their feet off. And then, you know, they'd get to school and then they'd put their shoes on, and being mocked by the children then saying, why? You need to wear your shoes. Like, that's why you wear your shoes. But for them, like you were saying, with hawera, keeping tidy and clean was part of it, because our whānau very much wanted to be able to thrive in this new world and the new systems and the new, I guess, reality that we found ourselves in. So it's further than 70 years back, you know, that these things were, I guess, diluted for us as a people. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
At the moment, Adrian, we have started off with our very new, a new entrant to year one. The intention, though, is that it will continue as we continue to, I want to do it properly, if you get what I mean. So, you know, play, free play is generally, I think, at the start what our teachers thought play was. So it's we wanted to start at the very start, and then we can follow these tamariki through, and as they go through, we develop on further. The actual reason why play was so interesting wasn't about our juniors at all. It was about our intermediates. So our kura goes up to year 7 and 8. And sometimes if we've had our older kids, our year 8s, you know, our 13-year-olds down with our 5-year-olds, they're not engaged in play with the kids at all. They're engaged with play of their own. So we started to quickly see that there were play gaps for them. You know, they would be really intensely involved in this play with the younger kids, equipment and things, because all of a sudden it was okay to play like that again, and that was really strong. So I'm new to play, but so we could really see their urges for play and the need for it, and they would be engrossed for hours in this play, and you know the junior teachers would sit there and have a giggle like they're supposed to be playing with these kids, but they're not at all. They're playing by themselves. Yeah, so that's the plan. That's the plan.
And I think it's a really sensible one too, because certainly we've seen really strong whole school play development has been very methodically and intentionally rolled out. And it's not just been, you know, open slather. It's been very, very, very thought after in terms of how it's going to be rolled out. And also too, the complexity of the teaching practices involved in this is not insignificant. And, you know, thinking about things like professional development workload, you know, rate of change, you know, how we can all kind of cope with the rate of change. I mean, at the same time, Te Whai Hiringa have got, for example, structured literacy being rolled out. You've got DIMIC, haven't you, that's come through. So there's, you know, all of these other things on top of this as well. We've had to kind of look at workload as well for our kaiako too. Any other questions? No? Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today, and thank you, T. It's as always a pleasure to be working alongside you, and I'm just really excited to be able to get stuck into this, hopefully with no interruptions to the start of the school year this year, touch wood. And yeah, we're, you know, really keen to be able to share what we're learning along the way, so that other kura can benefit as well and reflect on their processes too. So ngā mihi nui, thank you for joining us. Ngā mihi T as well, and enjoy the weekend.
Yes, back to it on Monday. Ngā mihi kōrua. Thank you, Sarah.
Ka kite, everyone.